Good evening and welcome to the West Orange Board of Education Public Board Meeting this September 20th, 2021. So a special welcome to our public attendees who are here with us this evening and to those who are viewing at home. And I'd like to just remind those at home that we are not managing the chat. So we are happy that you're joining us. And so I officially call this meeting to order. And so good evening, Dr. Cascone, fellow board members, and Mrs. Flowers. Would you please do roll call?
Good evening, everyone. Roll call. Mrs. Huerta.
Here.
Mrs. Merklinger.
Here.
Mr. Rothstein.
Here.
Vice President Tunnicliffe. President Trick-Scales.
Here.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Flowers. And now I would like to entertain a motion for consideration of the closed and public meeting minutes of August 30th, 2021. Is there a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Rothstein. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Merklinger. Any discussion? There being none, Mrs. Flowers, please.
Mrs. Huerta.
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger.
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein.
Yes.
President Trick-Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
And this brings us to one of our most exciting points of the first public board meeting of the school year. And that's when we get to meet our new student liaisons, our board student representatives for the year. And this year, it's a little bit different. We generally have 2 liaisons. This year, we have 4. And the reason for that is that our young people are so busy. Their time is so limited between their civic duties and obligations and activities, their extracurricular activities, as well as the heavy academic schedules that they have. And so through conversation with Mr. Moore and Ms. Connor, it was determined that perhaps sharing the load, having 4 student liaisons so that they can alternate at the meetings. And so it gives me great pleasure to ask our student council advisor extraordinaire if she would please come up, Ms. Connor, and introduce. Yes, please. Our impressive liaisons. I had the pleasure of meeting them last week and I am most impressed.
Yeah, so we, like you said, we had 4 this year, super impressive students that we have. So they've kind of paired up. So we'll have 2 at each meeting. So they only have to come to 1 meeting each. So tonight, who you'll actually meet in the next week. So tonight we've got Bahram and Rhoda, which are here. So they will do a little intro. And then next week, you'll get a formal introduction to Adrian and Hiab as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, you know, we were thinking if we can at least just meet them all 4 tonight, and then we'll learn a little bit more about the other 2 but they're here. So I would love for them to introduce themselves.
Well, first off, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very, very honored for the position. My name is Bahram Maretu, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm one of 4 student liaisons and an executive director for one of the organizations within West Orange, club president of Unity Club, an executive member of the Black Student Union here at West Orange High School, and a Governor's STEM Scholars alum, an activist, a new scholar at one of the programs offering quantum computing and part of multiple other extracurriculars. Too long to list. I would probably put the board and those present to sleep. So I'm going to skip those. But I'd first like to say how much of an honor it is to represent the views and concerns of the students of West Orange High School. This is a position that I take pride in, and a position that I will commit to myself to fully. I'm optimistic about the work that I, along with other student liaisons, will do, and I'm hopeful of our time together. So thank you.
Thank you, Bahram. So please have a seat.
Sorry, I'm a little shorter. Good evening, everyone. It's honoring to be here tonight with all of you. I'm privileged to be one of the 4 Board of Education student liaisons, and notably the only female this year, among 3 other males. Girl power. I have attended the West Orange school system since kindergarten, and I have lived here for 17 years, so basically my whole life. I would say that I'm involved in many extracurriculars here at West Orange High School. I'm a Mountaineer mentor. I'm currently the step team captain of the girls step team, so you will see me a lot. I'm also in the AFJROTC program, where I hold one of the high-ranking roles of being the assistant director of operations, and I'm also a cadet first lieutenant. I've been in that program for 4 years, and I also explore in all other clubs, which is also a long list, which will probably bore you as well. But one of my most notable contributions to the community is I work with my church a lot, and we're based in Irvington, and I do a lot of community work. So there's a little bit about me. It's been an honor to be chosen for this position. I was very nervous during the application, and I just hope that I am a voice and a help for all of you to understand the voices and opinions of West Orange High School and other schools. And I just hope that we make it a progressive year. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rhoda.
Hello, my name is Hiab Burhane. I am a senior, the vice president of the Unity Club, president of JSA, the secretary of the Institute of Citizens Empowerment, a member of 3 honor societies, a published author, among many other things. As someone who aspires to pursue a career in law and become a congressperson one day, being able to represent the West Orange student body as student liaison in my final year of high school is an important responsibility, which I'm honored to have bestowed upon me. And I look forward to working with all of you this year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Adrian Ampadu. I am blessed to be one of the student liaisons for the 2021-2022 school year. I look forward to working with everyone here and providing an insight into the student's perspective. I've been in the West Orange school system since kindergarten, and I'm very proud to hold this position today. I participate in the track and cross-country teams here at the West Orange High School, along with many other clubs and honor societies. I love to be immersed in my community and see this as a great opportunity to give back. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we will see you 2 gentlemen at the next meeting. So thank you so much for coming this evening. And please join me in welcoming our new student liaisons. And now we're going to put you right to work. And so you're up for student liaison reports.
Well, what we first have to report is the Stop for Nikhil Walk, the 11th annual JROTC Mountaineer Mentor Student Council and community members.
Bahram, you can take your mask off while you're
thank you.
speaking. Sure.
Thought it was a bit hard for y'all to hear. But
Just a tiny bit muffled.
well, recently we had our 11th annual walk for Stop for Nikhil Walk and run, also biking for those who enjoyed. We had members of the JROTC, which I'm a member of, cadet captain, along with cadet Oni right here. Members of the Mountaineer Mentors, student council, and community members attended to support a great cause that gives back to West Orange High School students. This is one of the extracurriculars, the youth advisory board that we have here at West Orange High School, one of the extracurriculars that we're very proud about. And one of the reasons that we're also here today to talk about the after school late buses, the extracurriculars at least. I would be remiss to ignore one of the present issues facing the students of West Orange High School, which is busing. I'm involved in many clubs, as you heard earlier, and programs at the high school, and have been throughout my time in the West Orange public school system. Without these programs, I wouldn't be the young man standing before you now. The future of potential leaders and productive citizens such as I are now at risk. The lack of late buses for hundreds of students and dozens of clubs is that threat. Theater clubs and music-related clubs can't hone and perfect their crafts. Language clubs can't engage in meaningful discussions about culture, and Unity Club, BSU, the JSA, and multiple other clubs can't actively discuss current events that affect us as students. These clubs and organizations aren't just extracurriculars. They're safe havens and safe spaces. The birthplaces of leaders, and possibly most important, the first step in preventing youth crimes. In a report from the California State Senate, it was found that among kids participating in after-school programs, vandalism and stealing dropped by 2/3, violent acts and carrying concealed weapons fell by over half, and arrests fell by half. These clubs engage students in school culture, academia, the arts, and keep them from engaging in gangs, drugs, and criminal activity. The future of our students, your children, is at risk. Our programs make sure that their future is secure.
Thank you. Rhoda.
Well, the only report I have for you today is about our Green Ribbon Week that we are participating in this year. This week, sorry. At YHS, we are partnering with the Grassroots Community Foundation for Green Ribbon Week, a mental health awareness week. This week is full of spreading awareness on how to improve mental wellness and the resources and supports YHS offers. We are wearing green this week, as Ms. Connors has beautifully demonstrated. And we are going to post on our social media accounts, the Student Council account, the Mountaineer Mentors account, and the general West Orange Schools account. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really do appreciate that you are coming to us with current events. We are still in the beginning phase here of this school year. And so what we'll do right now, I don't know, Dr. Cascone, did you want to respond, or how would you like to handle?
Yeah, thank you, President Trix-Scales. So I think the question is would you, because transportation and busing was certainly going to be part of it's going to be a bullet point really in an opening update just on school reopening. So I guess the question, Board President, is would you prefer for me to do that first and then segue into the goals portion that we have on the superintendent's report, or would you rather do the goals and have me close with the school reopening update?
Let's just segue right into the transportation piece.
The transportation. Okay, very good.
Thank you, Doug.
So I will speak to busing and transportation kind of in the context of school reopening as a whole. So we're back. We've been back for approximately 7 days now. I think today was the 7th day, including the half day that we dismissed early for the heat and humidity. And I would be remiss if I did not just extend my thanks to our students and our parents and guardians and caretakers for working with us and making that, that pivot on that day was very much appreciated. So we've been in, I would say from my perspective, holistically speaking, it's been a successful opening. I base that not only on my perspective and some of the feedback that I'm receiving from people within the organization, and that's both staff members as well as administrators, but also by and large what I'm hearing and observing from our constituents in the community and my interactions with them at events and emails and things of that nature. There are some notable exceptions, which we should speak about. I think that we can all agree that some of the bumps in the road, for lack of no pun intended, I should say, relative to busing in that first week were a challenge. And so I'd like to speak to that a little bit and help the community understand what are some of the circumstances and factors that are contributing to some of those difficulties. I think the first thing to realize is that the endeavor of transporting 4,000 children on a daily basis, doing so safely and at the same time in as timely a fashion as possible, is always a complex undertaking. And it annually, is more of a challenge early on, as everyone that's involved in ensuring that that happens in a timely fashion is getting used to it. And I think that's important really to recognize is that timely buses, yes, they certainly the drivers play a part in that, but we all play a part in that, from families to students to building administrators, ensuring that our dismissal procedures are happening as quickly and efficiently as possible. And the reality of that is that none of that happens instantaneously overnight. In particular, when we're talking about returning after, being out of school for 18 months and not having transported 4,000 students in almost 2 years. But there's some kind of more global macro challenges at play that have been exacerbating some of these challenges that we encountered early on as far as the delays go. As you know, there's a driver shortage, a bus driver shortage, not only in with the contractors with which we work here in West Orange, but statewide, tri-state area. It's not only affecting West Orange. And that's necessitated the district to do is compress runs, right? So that we have longer routes. What further complicates that is that we have some of our buses that do triple runs. So they start at the high school, then they do the middle school, and then they do the elementary school. So if that's not operating exactly on time, then it really, and it tends to impact the elementary runs the most, because they're kind of the last stop on the route, if you will. I'm pleased to report that, everything I hear from building administrators as well as parents is that it's consistently improving day by day. This continues to be something that we focus on. It will be agenda item at our principal meetings tomorrow, at which I'll really be speaking about the fact that having timely buses is really truly a team effort. We all have to be pulling in the same direction and realizing that there are many parties that play a role in timely buses. There was a comment in the Google form, and I think I'll acknowledge it now just because it's in the flow of this report. When it comes to communicating, right? So letting parents know if buses are going to be late. I would tend to agree that we need to do a better job of that. We need to figure out a way to get parents. We do have means to communicate with parents if that bus is going to be late. And admittedly, I haven't had a chance to dip into practice and the extent to which we're doing that. And if we're not, why? But I think that's a fair critique and one that we need to potentially be doing a better job of, but it is improving daily. And obviously we want our bus drivers to not be rushing per se. Better safe than sorry. As far as the late buses go, and I want to provide a little bit of context for this. So West Orange has typically offered multiple late bus runs at both the middle school and the high school. Now, as part of the budgetary process for this year, we did cut them to 2 runs, but it was always our expectation that we would do one at approximately 3:30 or 4, and then we would do a later bus run, between 5 and 6 or something of that nature. It always was our intention. Know that the decision to cut the 3:30 bus was not discretionary. It was not a subjective decision where we said was an either or. Well, should we cut the 3:30 or the 5:30? The reason we cut the 3:30 is because those runs were originally contracted to our third-party contractor, Hunterdon ESC. Hunterdon ESC reached out to us, I think it was approximately 2 weeks ago, and said, we've had additional drivers resign. We don't have the drivers to offer those runs. Of course, our drivers can't do those runs because our drivers are out doing elementary runs at that same time. In terms of going out, and our director of transportation has been calling co-ops and private vendors to understand. But of course, that's a prime time, right? I mean, that's dismissal time. So any private vendors that have drivers or buses have been contracted to do, during year runs. So it's very difficult to find any available drivers or companies to do that. That is, at this juncture, the unfortunate reality. I mean, I think if there's any silver lining to it is that this driver shortage is impacting many other districts in far more significant ways. And I'm not minimizing the importance of that bus when I say that, but when we talk about that versus not being able to actually transport kids to school, and we hold those two side by side, there are districts that presently are not even able to do that, to get kids to and from school. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our, I've been speaking with the high school principal and team, and what else can we do if we can't actually get buses at 3:30? And I think there are several creative things we can do. One is that we can offer later start times to clubs. I mean, those are extra paid positions. Those are positions, the responsibilities of which can, and one might even say should be delivered outside of the contractual workday. So when we're able to start club sessions later, we can do that. We can offer Saturday meetings as a possibility where we have the accessibility to run activity buses on the weekend. We can do hybrid approaches where sometimes we do in-person meetings and sometimes we do virtual meetings, which, we were able to utilize last year and continue clubs running. I've also talked to the high school administration about, well, let's offer staffed after-school study hours and after-school sessions so that students can stay. They can be in a supervised location where they can do homework and do study hours, and then they could go to their club study hours, and then get on one of those later buses. And finally, just to kind of clear up some misconceptions about those buses. Those buses, and I spoke with the director of transportation today. I believe there are five minimum late buses that are available for both the 5 and the 6:30 run. So that means we have accommodations for, over 200 students per run. And those are any students who are engaged in some form of after-school activity, whether that be athletics or whether that be an artistic pursuit, a club, what have you. They're open and all students are eligible to travel in those buses. In terms of early dismissal days, for those clubs and activities that wish to have kids remain, through the end of the day, during the early dismissal, we will be able to, like we did last time, offer, grab and go lunches for students who may wish to stay on campus for some other purpose, whether that be athletic or otherwise. I think we need to move, and I agree with you. Everything you've said, Bahram, is absolutely spot on. The research, the misfortune of this logistic issue right now. What I would suggest is let's dedicate our energies to thinking about what we can do to resolve it outside of getting another bus. And I think that's where we're at right now, is how can we continue to offer these clubs and activities in the absence of a 3:30 bus, because presently we're just simply not able to do that. We don't have the resources or the contractors to offer that. Final point, we will continue to look at it. We will continue to pursue options. We will continue to talk with Hunterdon. We continue to try and hire additional drivers, as does Hunterdon ESC. So the situation can certainly improve, and we will continue to stay on top of it with the end game of ultimately reoffering that 3:30 run. So that's that's sort of that's just top of mind items for reopening. Just kind of a word about health and safety. So we've been bringing students together in some way, shape, or form now for at least 6 weeks. Whether that's summer athletic training camps, band camps, cheerleading camps. And of course, now we're bringing in approximately 9,000 people into our buildings on a daily basis. And this is at a time when the community is observing a moderate level of transmission within the community. So we're not at a low level of transmission. And while we have had a handful of reported cases, most of which have been confirmed as out-of-school transmission, I think when you look at that record, that ratio, number of students and staff members in the building, something is going right? And we could hypothesize as to what is leading to that success. And I think what is that? Well, I think part of it is that we have a extremely high level of vaccination within our community, and I shared those numbers with you in my update. 81% of our 12 to 17-year-olds are vaccinated. And that's data that's coming from the County Department of Health. And as you go up in the age groups, that number goes up even higher. It's 89% in students in people between 18 to 29. And as you move up in age, it becomes higher. Whereas in the most in our elderly populations, you're talking about close to, if not 100% of the population vaccinated. While we don't presently have definitive data on staff vaccination rates, we are in the process of collecting that information now in order to be aligned with the governor's order by October 18th. But I would venture to say that the percentage of our staff that's vaccinated is probably similar to that. I would say it's probably anywhere between 80 and 90% of our staff members. And of course, effective October 18th, all employees, and that's both Board of Education employees as well as any individual that steps foot in our building in terms of a contractor, that those companies will need to sign statements of assurance verifying that their employees are either vaccinated and or are going through weekly testing program. And of course, our board employees will do the same thing. So I think that these early signs are positive in terms of universal masking, our cleaning and sanitization protocols, the utilization of COVID killing of HVAC technology, and really all the work that we've done to ensure that our spaces are properly ventilated and our students are properly spaced whenever possible. Final point on this, a week before school opened, we got updated guidelines from the New Jersey Department of Health. We were anxiously awaiting the State Department of Health to weigh in over the course of the summer as we engaged in our planning. Perhaps to some extent to our dismay, it was not until the week before the school year that the State Department of Health came out. And within those guidelines, they had in their recommendations for random or regular student testing. Subsequent to that, the State Department of Health, the governor's office indicated that they were going to be providing supports to school districts to implement student testing programs. And there are two options that school districts can pursue. One is what's called end-to-end, which is where the state provides management of that testing program, soup to nuts, if you will, or as they say, end-to-end. And the other one is where you can request funds and then build and oversee and facilitate your own testing program. Now, we did speak, as you're probably aware, we do have a health and safety advisory board with which we meet on a monthly basis. President Trigg Scales joins us as representative from the board. It's made up of a variety of different, both internal people and external, that come from public health and medical backgrounds. There was by and large consensus that some degree of surveillance testing, as they referred to it, is a good thing. But I think all of those folks on that panel acknowledged and recognized the logistic undertaking that it represents for an organization, an institution that does not have medicine and public health as its primary mission. Well, our primary mission is teaching and learning. We're not a hospital. We're not a public health organization. And so all I would ask for is that folks, exercise a little bit of patience with us as we understand how logistically we are going to manage that process of even testing 10% of our students on a regular basis. That's 700 students a week. And what's the best way to do that? And not only simply from a logistic efficacy standpoint, but also with a critical eye on student experience as well, right? I mean, we're talking about SEL. We're talking about students feeling comfortable and a sense of normalcy when they come back to school. And so considering that we're probably talking about testing primarily our youngest learners, we want to be sensitive to that. For some students, this is their first experience with school. And we want to be sensitive to, when we're bringing them into school, having them, swab their nose and things of that nature. What I've seen and learned from many of the school districts that are doing student testing, particularly on the western part of the United States, and a lot of the western states and school districts seem to have these kind of full-scale student testing programs as places. They do them in school. The third party comes in, they bring the bio kits in, the students swab in the classroom, they put it back in the bio kit, and then the third party takes the kit and they bring them away, right? So I think we can agree that that will represent a consuming of some instructional time. It will obviously impact the student experience in school, and maybe that's all worth it. But these are things that we need to consider in no matter in which we go approach this process. What I can tell you is we will be implementing some sort of a student testing protocol. We have applied to participate in the state's end-to-end testing program. But even presently, I continue to engage with providers to understand. And I'm going to tell you, many of the providers that I've been speaking with, and I've been speaking with them primarily as partners in potential staff testing programs, because yes, we are in the midst of understanding how we're going to best manage that mandate from the governor. And that's no easy feat either, I might tell you. Understanding who we need to test and ensuring that we're testing or ensuring vaccination of all people who step foot through our doors. And incidentally, the governor gave us a little bit more notice on that. That came 2 weeks before the beginning of the school year. But in my conversations with testing providers, many of them have yet to even begin or do student testing programs. A couple of them that I asked, I said, well, I'm just looking for some insights. We're engaging primarily to talk about staff testing, but I'm curious because we're really exploring student testing. Talk to us a little bit about that. And at least the ones with which I've spoken, they have yet to engage with any school district partners, in this endeavor. But we are committed to doing it, but we want to do it right. And of course, we want to make sure that it's sustainable and that we have the resources to do it. One final piece is, I appreciate it, President Trixie, yes, is this may very well necessitate the hiring through our grant funding of a public health or medical professional that basically oversees and coordinates this testing program soup to nuts. Because I'm going to tell you, our team's at critical mass right now. There's in terms of managing the existing workload and requirements and responsibilities that come with managing what we're doing right now. We certainly don't have a staff member that has the bandwidth, so to speak, to be overseeing, facilitating a testing program of 6,800 people, not including staff. But we are committed, and we are researching, and we are applying for resources that can help us do this. And that would conclude my introductory portion.
Thank you, Dr. Casco.
See, I don't have anybody to talk to during the day. So when I actually, I'm kidding.
I know it's the mic and the camera, right? Well, thank you so much. So what we'll do before we get into the goals presentation is just go around and see if board members and our new liaisons have questions for Dr. Cascone. And we'll start with the board, and student liaisons will bring you back around. And let's see, Mrs. Huerta, questions?
Thank you, President Trixgales. Thank you, student liaisons, and thank you to the public that's here today. Dr. Cascone, I just had a couple of questions about the buses. So we do have late buses. Is this only on the high school level, or is this available for the middle schoolers as well, the late buses?
That's a good question. My understanding is that presently with our resources, we're only able to offer a 5:30, I'm sorry, a 5 and a 6:30 at the high school presently.
Okay. So for the after-school programs currently at the middle schools, they will only be virtual? Is that?
That's correct. Presently, I mean, we are intending to offer middle school athletics. The building principals, it's a little bit of a different dynamic at Roosevelt than it is at Liberty, because Roosevelt has a good number of walkers. So Principal Hush does not foresee the absence of after-school busing being as much of an issue at Roosevelt. At Liberty, what they're seeking to do now is, first off, I should mention that that interest levels, before there was even the announcement about activity buses, the interest levels and numbers in middle school athletics has been significantly lower. So in some cases, there's question marks as to whether or not they'll have enough folks to field teams. But in addition to that, and particularly at Liberty School, they're seeking to understand from the students who have expressed interest in participating in the athletics, what is their ability to self-transport? Is there the possibility to do some form of of carpooling. So they are ascertaining that. But above and beyond that, and we would approach it in the same way with Ms. Huerta, is, we could very well offer, Saturday events and things of that nature, whether it be car washes or, meetings or things of that nature. So we're trying to get creative with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another question that comes up. So if the activities will be virtual, do the middle schoolers have one-to-one Chromebooks that they take home? Because if their activities are virtual and they don't have access to those activities because of lack of either internet service or access to a Chromebook or individual Chromebook.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you raise a good question, and it I would argue it merits some additional commentary on my part, because this idea of one-to-one access at home for middle school students is a conversation point beyond just simply participating in after-school athletics. The year of when the pandemic hit, that September, the district discontinued the practice of middle school students bringing home Chromebooks. And the reason they did that was because there was a tremendous amount of breakage and damaging happened to Chromebooks. The middle schools attempted to do an in-school loaner where a student would get their own device at the beginning of the day and return at the end. And from what I understand, speaking to the principals, there was a similar amount of damage and breakage that was occurring. This was leading to not only expense, and the consummation of human resource time as the technology team was managing almost 24/7, the turning in of devices, the submitting of claims, but more importantly was having adequate inventory and being able to turn those broken devices around quickly. Now, in pre-pandemic conditions, the turnaround time for getting additional devices was relatively quick to what it is now. By sending Chromebooks home, if we were to do one-to-one at the middle school and we were to see a similar amount of breakage and damage as we saw pre-pandemic, what that would mean is twofold. One, first of all, we would not necessarily be able to turn those broken Chromebooks around quickly enough where we could actually re-outfit the students with Chromebooks. We would then not have access to the Chromebooks in the classroom, and we might not even have access to Chromebooks to be able to send out as loaners as students have to quarantine and remain home. So it's back to kind of that busing. It's like the busing question. It's a conundrum. That we're focusing on. And so I can tell you that it was a topic of conversation at last week's principal meetings. It will be a topic of conversation again at this week's principal meetings, because there is an equity piece at play. There is an equity piece. Presently, we don't have the inventory. And I'll tell you, say, well, geez, why don't we? We purchased thousands of Chromebooks, this additional units. We refreshed all of our K2 devices, which were failing. So we bought thousands of Chromebooks this year. We've been allocating resources to that. But the reality of it is that we don't presently have the inventory to give a loaner to anyone that potentially needs one at home and have adequate inventory in school. Now, what you probably saw, Ms. Webb, I know we've talked about this before, is that we are participating in that state grant, and that state and federal grant. You saw that the survey went back out, and at some time this year, later rather than sooner, unfortunately, we will be in receipt of thousands of additional devices, which then go to all those individuals who have responded to the survey. And it's about 2,500. Now, that's anyone that doesn't have a device at home other than a school district issued device, meaning they don't have their own outside of school issued. So, and that will help. We are also looking at purchasing more, modifying and amending our grant, our ESSER 3 grant currently to allocate some of that grant towards the purchasing of additional devices. But again, we're looking at, I think Mr. Santiago said, we're looking at like a 2-month turnaround in the supply chain from the point of order to the point of receipt of devices. So it is something that we're continuing to talk about. We're trying to come up with solutions for that. But right now, our priorities are ensuring that every student has a computer when they're in the classroom and that we have computers to give people when they have to go out on quarantine. Those are our primary priorities right now.
Thank you. So just because I'm noticing that these are all compounding situations that are happening to our students who are underprivileged, might not have access, and it's just a compounding of, things happening consistently. And there's no easy solution, I think. Another question I had about the reopening. The school lunches are all grab and go. The breakfasts are all grab and go still. Do we intend on having any hot lunch available for our students soon? Or is there a timeline for that? Or is it just grab and go?
I have not had a conversation more recently with Lori Craigle. I know that it's our food services director. I know that they aspire to moving beyond this. I think presently, on day 7, we are still working, we're still getting into a rhythm on managing the logistics, and it's, it's more complicated in certain schools than others. Notably the high school where we're trying to feed 2,000 kids, simultaneously. So I think right now our primary focus is ensuring that students have access to food, and that our operations are safe, right, and well managed, and that we get into a bit of a rhythm in how to implement those lunches. I think once we have our feet under us and we're comfortable with our operational procedures, then I think, kind of as the expression goes, once, we have to walk before we can run. And we're walking right now with the aspiration to run at some point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't believe I have any more questions in regard to the school opening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Mrs. Merklinger?
Thank you. So with middle school sports that you were mentioning and after school activities, and the decline, we've seen this happen over the course of a few years now, and especially with so many organizations within our community offering athletics, whether it's the rec department or Mountaintop PAL. Would we find ourselves, if we found ourselves in a situation where we didn't have enough student participation? I know we have a few stipends to approve on tonight's for coaches.
Yeah.
Would we revert those back or pull those back?
I'm certainly, willing to engage the Teachers Association again, relative to, getting a sidebar in place, with a kind of a provision of, if the season runs and if it doesn't. Presently, we don't have that sidebar in place. There are some districts that have been able to execute a sidebar like that. So I'm happy to have that conversation again.
I mean, I think the fortunate thing about our community is that we do have other opportunities for our community members and students to participate. And I know all the organizations within the community do take financial challenges into consideration. So if that were an issue, obviously they would work with them, but definitely it's a backup plan for should there not be middle school sports. With the testing of students, has there been any conversation with the health and safety community advisory group about about privacy? And so students who may not be comfortable or parents who are not comfortable with their students being selected. I know we do random drug testing has been, so I would equate it with that. But just curious, we've never tested for like the flu or HPV or anything in the past. So I know this is coming from the governor, but just curious how we're going to handle the privacy piece of it, or if there's any discussion about the privacy part of that.
My understanding is that that there needs to be parental consent for students to participate in the testing program. So that I think would, for folks who had privacy concerns, they would ultimately have to consent to their child participating in it.
And then I know we have Dr. Kelly as our medical director, and you were speaking to having someone, would that be something that falls into his role as overseeing the testing? Or I know you mentioned about hiring someone, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this would be somebody, I mean, Dr. Kelly, really, the primary capacities in which he's serving right now is he's one of the individuals with whom we consult regarding, we have questions about contact tracing, or we have questions about, quarantine, lengths of quarantine. He's also been working with us on evaluating requests for, medical exemptions for on-site instruction. Those, I would say, are the primary capacities in which he's advising. I would envision this being, and I've seen other districts post for it as basically like a COVID coordinator, essentially, like somebody who kind of ties all those pieces together. And we're sort of triaging it now, we're platooning it, and we're okay with that right now. But if you add this additional piece, I would argue that platooning it would not be effective. I think we need to have somebody and that's why we really, the end-to-end program with the state really appeals to us, because they would manage it.
no, that definitely makes sense. Just to kind of go a little bit further on Ms. Huerta's question about the grab and go lunches. So I know a lot of districts are, my son's own school, which has the space, is doing grab and go lunches. And I think a lot of our surrounding districts are still in that world as well. But just in terms of, I know we purchased tents, we have tents up. I've seen at some of the elementary schools. Have we started utilizing those, or how do we start utilizing those for maybe going outdoors for lunch? I think at the high school, seniors are allowed to go out now.
Yeah.
So I know we've come up with some creative ways to address lunch for all of our students, but just wondering how the tents are going.
Yeah, I mean, it varies. It varies from school to school. And of course, we don't want to bake the tents in too solidly into our plans, because we know that in inclement weather we can't use them, right? Not only now, but then ultimately when it gets really cold. So I think they're really being used in a variety of different ways. We did have, for example, at Edison School, their setup there is a little bit more weather resistant. We had a pea gravel bed laid down so that it could be used, when there's wet weather. So they're really being used for a variety of different purposes when the weather permits.
That was all I had. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And Mr. Rothstein.
First, just wanted to say, wow, great questions from my colleagues tonight. Thank you both. That really just leaves me with one, which is also with regards to the potential hiring of somebody to help administer the testing program. Dr. Cascone, you had mentioned that could potentially be done through federal funding. And so my question was, would that be additional funding that we apply for, or would be reallocating funding that we had already planned on spending elsewhere?
The latter.
Okay.
It would involve, and we're seeing, we're seeing that in a number of ways. Mr. Rothstein, when we plan these grants, that they were submitted at a time when we were kind of developing them in a bit of a vacuum. When we this summer, when we really got down into the nitty gritty, the planning, and then even more so, even now that we've implemented, those processes have shed light on needs that would not necessarily have presented themselves just in the theoretical planning process. And so we're finding the need to amend some of our grants, like examples. We've hired additional lunch aides. We are allocating some additional funds for lead staff at the elementary schools to help plan and facilitate recess activities. All those things have emerged later in the process, and all which are being funded out of our, actually we're spending down ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 now. This I would foresee coming out of ESSER 3.
Got it. Thank you. It would be great to sort of see what that decision making is when it comes to the,
Yep,
comes to it.
absolutely. I promise to keep the board fully involved, fully informed.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
No other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rothstein. And now we'll go to our student liaisons. If we go alphabetically, we'll do Baharam.
Thank you, President Trixfield.
Mhm.
So you already answered one of my questions about privacy, and thank you for that. But one of the questions I have about the testing programs is you mentioned some of the testing programs on the West Coast. Could you shed some light on that? I know they already started like school early and they have like everything kind of figured out.
Yeah, I mean, just some of the testing, thank you for that. Some of the testing providers, with which I've spoken, are they're national organizations, right? So they have clients throughout the country. And interestingly, the providers with which I've spoken who are locally haven't been able to provide a lot of practical feedback on actually doing it. The ones where I've gotten more feedback have been from companies that are national and are doing testing in other parts of the country. And what they've explained to me, the way those testing programs are functioning in those schools, is that the testing is happening in school. Students are self-swabbing, placing the swab in a BioKit, and then the providers are collecting those samples and shipping them out, to a lab. Now the labs most of these companies tend to have local labs or regionally based labs, so that the process of mailing them from the school to the lab is a relatively short one. But they may be based in another location, another state.
Got you. And another one of my questions about
Sure.
transportation and busing.
Mhm.
You talked earlier about pushing back some of the times of the starting times for the clubs. During that time, you said something about the study hall period. Like, could you further elaborate that?
Sure. And then this is like a Doc C special, this is something, but I think it could work, which is, if we do the club and activity meetings immediately after school, and then basically we provide a supervised space, where students can, if they're not able to get home on their own means and are, depending upon a bus, then they can remain in that supervised space until the 5 o'clock bus and then take that home. Of course, we also have, a variety of different things that are happening around the campus. So, athletic events, and certainly we start to get into rehearsals. Those rehearsals might run a little bit longer. So the amount of time that some students might actually have to, to kill, if you will, might be a little bit less. But I think that having a supervised space where students could go, like, study commons or something like that, obviously the health and safety protocols would be in place, distancing and masking and all that. But I think it could be a good solution. And that would, Mr. Rothstein, just as a sidebar, the funding for the staff to work those locations would also likely come out of our federal grants. Yeah.
Thank you. And for my final question, we were talking about lunches. Currently we have cold lunches and I haven't seen any problems or anybody really complaining about that within the high school. But the issue of hot lunches, I know that you said that it hasn't been like something that you've been like into right now because of all the problems going on with Chromebooks and transportation and everything that's going on. But in regards to hot lunches, some of the school districts around our area, such as Patterson, have been getting a lot of complaints from the student because of like the state and quality of the hot lunches. Some of them have like they have meats that are like unrecognizable, and like they have like veggie loaf, which is something like I'm pretty sure they feed prisoners, which they're feeding to the kids. And that's one of the things that I'm kind of concerned about. I know you said that you have been able to like really delve deep into that, but do you have any idea of like what the quality of the food is going to be, like anything of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're, I think you're kind of keying in on something here, which is, what the way we've typically done lunches here with health and safety protocols are going to be challenging, right? So some of the nicest aspects of our lunches typically have been like, I think like your salad bars and And all of those are off the table because they're not considered sanitary under the guidelines, right? I think even when you talk about being in a service line for food, and it raises challenges just ensuring health and safety of people when trying to serve hot lunches. And yes, when you're talking about trying to turn over so much hot food in such a short period of time, it becomes increasingly difficult to ensure that it's that's really high quality, right? It becomes a quantity thing over quality, right? And I think a more constructive focus might be, let's take a dive into what we're getting within the cold lunches. And, can we get creative about what we're, creative and more varied in what we're doing in the cold lunches, rather than the hot piece, which I can foresee being just a challenge from a health and safety standpoint for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Bahram. Rhoda.
So Bahram stole most of my questions.
It happens all the time.
I just want to give a little insight into also the lunch situation here and also the bus situation. I eat the cold lunch here. I'm not that rich to buy lunch every day. But I will say with what is happening with the seniors is that we're seeing a time problem with going out and buying lunch, especially with the restaurants that are closer to us, Bagel Box, Fortissimo, that does not open till 11 o'clock and lunch does end at 11:24. So that has been breeding a little bit of problem with students coming in later than expected. Also, the lines have been ridiculous. Today, I attempted to go to Bagel Box and the line wrapped around outside all the way down that road that leads to the gate over here. So I don't know if there's any way to regulate that where I know you've given us a little, I think about 2 minutes before the bell rings, 3 minutes before the bell rings to leave. But if there could be any way to regulate that and where we're not all compacted in that area for such a long time waiting for lunch, because I know a lot of us, I don't drive yet, Bahram doesn't drive yet. So there's a lot of, concern with that in terms of getting disciplinary action with not coming back on time. So is there any way we can possibly help that situation with the seniors?
Yeah, so I think that that strikes me as sort of a building-based operational challenge. I think if anybody can perhaps lend some helpful insight, it's the students, right? And so, what I would recommend, and I don't know if you, as a student government liaisons, whether you meet regularly with the building principal or the administrative team. I think that's, and listen, I'm meeting with the high school team tomorrow, and I'm happy to bring this feedback to them. But I think ultimately, like getting creative about how we can improve the situation for you. I would love to see the students have a place at the table to provide the feedback and also to maybe, weigh in and potentially suggest some possible solutions. If this last 18 months has taught me anything, like there's really nothing we can't solve. You know what I mean? Like, if we come together and think critically about it, I'm sure that there is something that can be done to improve that. Whether it will be the ideal, maybe not, but certainly to be better than it is, I'm very confident that can happen. I'm happy to bring it to Mr. Moore and his team tomorrow, but I'd also encourage you to do the same.
Okay. In referring to the buses, this is not a question. This is just a little bit of insight into why you see some of our students here today. I also had a pressing question about that. At the time that the board and this, sorry, I'm dealing with allergies right now. I'm back. So at the time that you did announce, which was last week, about the 3:30 late buses, approximately a day after, there was a 3:30 late bus provided for sports students only. So those who are involved in any of the track, football and volleyball, which is happening right now in this season. So it did infuriate most of the student body. And I will be honest, including myself, because I am heading a team this year that relies on late buses as of right now. And we've had to cancel a lot of our practices because of this. And coming here is helping me understand why that is happening. And I'm happy to go back out to the student body and relay this information. But I think the problem was the students were recognizing some sort of bias and with how the board and the transportation team was distributing these buses and only allowing sports students on these buses. I know that I've been informed that without a coach's approval, I cannot get on a late bus. And thankfully, I only live up the street from the school. But as it applies to students who do not have a late pass or a pass, like we're not allowed on those buses. So it was interesting to hear you say that we are allowed on those buses, but we are actually never allowed on those buses. So I think that is why we have, I think they're part of the theater department, and they are here because on the day that we did leave early and we didn't have school the next day, there was a late bus provided for only sports students only, and they had an activity that was running through that time, and they were not permitted to get on the late bus, which led them to not have that program run that day. So I think that that's where there's a communication problem between you lovely people here and the student body, where they're misunderstanding where the root of the problem is, because they're thinking that the root of the problem is here and not with the third party vendor. So if there's any way to get this information out to parents or teachers to relay this down, because when you ask a teacher, they don't even know what's happening. So without that, I believe that it creates a kind of anger within the student body, because there's a lot of activities that are not related to sports that need these late buses. So I think that's where the problem is.
Thank you for that. And I'm happy to make some comments. I think first is that, obviously as the superintendent, I shoulder certain responsibilities as it relates to communicating with stakeholders. And I think that in the 2+ years that I've been here, I think that, I have a pretty solid and demonstrated track record of being transparent and consistent in my communication to my stakeholders. There are other parties who also have communication responsibilities with their constituents. I am not the mouthpiece for every school. Ultimately, I am the mouthpiece, if you will, for the district. There were 2 communications that went out. Obviously, I communicated that to the community, and I'll address, it coming out the day after in a moment. And I did share that information with the building principal, who subsequently shared it with the club and activity advisor, so they had some insight into why that occurred. And I would agree. I mean, reflectively, the communication from the district level could have come out a bit earlier to the principal, in order that he had the information to in turn share with the staff and the students. I apologize that there was a moment in time when people and students and parents who represent, the arts constituency, there was a moment in time where you felt like that, right? Where you had a feeling as if you weren't valued as much as somebody else. I'm sorry that you had a moment in time where you felt like that. The reality of it is that whether this board, the resources that the district devotes to the arts, the outstanding arts programs we have. I mean, certainly I would suggest, my support as the superintendent, so far as I'm able to do that for our students and those programs. I love all activities our students do. I just love to see our students shine and excel, and show off what they can do, whether it's an instrument, a sport, or what have you. That was there was a there was a drop ball at that key point in time, which I think now we picked up, right? Like we picked it up and, we've sent the message out that no, like all students, all pursuits are going to be treated equitably. But yes, there was that moment in time, and I apologize for that because you should never feel that way about your community, about your superintendent, that I'm not advocating equally for all students. So I do apologize for that. That there was that just a little bit of a lapse, a 24-hour lapse in the communication. But I understand.
Yes, Ms. Merklinger?
Just for the community knowledge, and I apologize because when I went to Roosevelt, to get on a late bus, you did have to have a late pass.
Thank you for that.
So I didn't know,
Yeah, no,
do we
thank you.
require a late bus pass to get onto the buses?
Well, I think the, I think the reason for the passes is that we do have limited spaces on the buses, right? And we want those seats to be reserved for students who are staying behind in school for legitimate purposes, whether that's sports, whether that's the arts, whether that's if they stayed for additional extra help. We, truthfully, we don't really want one of those seats being claimed by a student that went and, was hanging around with their friends at their house and then jumped back on a bus. Like that's, perhaps when we were running 4 late buses, we had the luxury of doing that, but we certainly don't have the luxury of doing that now. But any student that stays on for a legitimate activity should be provided access to the bus. And it's in the way of ensuring and protecting yourself for that privilege as a person that's staying after is to have some sort of a pass, just like you do when you get on the bus, that shows that you're authorized to be there. If something needs to be tidied up with the way in which those passes are given, I think that's a fair point to bring forward to the high school administration if you feel as if that's not being done equitably or it's not being done consistently. But anyone that's here for a legitimate activity should have access to a bus.
And for my, I think, last 2 final questions regarding the student testing for COVID. For those parents who choose not to consent their child to COVID testing, what is the plan for those group of students? Because honestly, there will be a group of students where their parents will say no to COVID testing. Would that hinder them from participating in certain school events or even coming to school? How would that work out?
Yeah. My answer to that question would be no. I think that our goal is to try and enhance our safety protocols, whether that be through vaccination, testing, whatever the case may be, as much as possible, right? Obviously, we aspire to 100%. But in the end, we're limited in certain ways in what we can do, right? We know that presently the vaccine is not mandated for students. So as a district, we would be hard pressed to mandate it for students. Now, what we can do is we can continue to offer pop-up clinics. We can continue to provide parents with the opportunity to do that. But I think it's about getting as close as we can to that 100%. But no, it would not preclude them from coming. Testing is not a requirement for students to attend school or to participate in activities.
Also, with communicating to parents about this COVID testing,
Yeah, we're gonna wrap it up.
would this be through a legal document that we'll be signing and bringing home, or especially for those parents who don't speak English and everything? I know that we translate into different languages, or will this be an electronic thing? How would that be administered out to all the students?
I mean, certainly information pertaining to how the program was going to work. That information would be provided to the parents in 3 languages that we typically distribute them. And then in terms of, providing support to parents who may need it for how to register or how to provide consent, we would have to do that on a ongoing basis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All fabulous questions, and I'm sure we could go on and on, but I always try to be sensitive to the time and knowing that we have questions from the public coming up shortly. I just wanted to mention on the testing piece that saliva tests are also recommended for the student screenings. So it's in addition to the swab testing. Okay, so moving on to I'm going to quickly report out on the status of our 2020-21 board goals, and then talk a little bit about our board goals going forward for the next year. So pardon me if I read, I'll read quickly, I promise. I had coffee. Number one, the Board of Education, in concert with the administration, will review and evaluate district expenditures across all budget lines beginning in December 2020, and will identify opportunities for efficiencies and financial savings in the budget preparation for the 2021-22 school year. And relative to that goal, the board began the budget process in December 2020. It held its public budget town hall on December 9th, 2020. The administration presented opportunities for efficiencies and financial savings, which the board reviewed and assessed. Formal budget presentations were made to both the board and the public in February and March, and the 2021-22 Board of Education budget was approved for submission to the county on May 3rd, 2021. Number two, the Board of Education will increase parent and community engagement by conducting 2 town hall meetings, one in the fall to identify the community's priorities for the 21-22 budget preparation, and one in the spring to gain input in the setting of the board's goals for the 21-22 school year. Number two, follow-up. The board conducted 2 town hall meetings, one budget town hall in December, and the second was a goal-setting town hall in June, which included a community survey. Number three, the Board of Education will assess the district's progress toward the goals of the 5-year strategic plan, and including opportunities for input from the public, will review the plan's current relevancy and its implications on student achievement, policy, budget, community relations, and other areas of board responsibility so as to enable the administration to develop action plans for implementation which align with the board's review. Status of number three. The board reviewed the district's progress toward the goals of the 5-year strategic plan. The administration made a presentation to the board and the public in June. Areas for improvement were cited as well as accomplishments. The new 5-year strategic plan will be developed in the 21-22 school year and will include participation of the school community. Action plans will be developed as part of this collaborative effort. And finally, number four, the Board of Education will complete the conversion of the board's policy manual and accompanying bylaws and regulations to Strauss Esme and fully implement the Elon online search engine by January 2021. The board did not accomplish this goal during the 2020-21 school year. The January 21 completion date was pushed forward to June 2021. Although nearly completed, the anticipated date of completion of this conversion of the current board's policy manual will be October 2021, with availability on the eLine online search engine shortly thereafter. I promise. We promise. All right, so that's 2021. And now, if you were with us a couple of board meetings ago, I presented 7 possible goals for the board, and much to my amazement, the board wanted to include all 7. So we are an ambitious board, but we are making sure that the goals are SMART, and that's an acronym for they are specific, they are measurable, they are attainable, they're relevant, and they're timely. And so we're hoping that by June of next year, all of this can be accomplished. And again, I'll read quickly. The West Orange Board of Education will support the work of the administration to define multiple measures to assess and evaluate student achievement. Such measures will evaluate effectiveness of programs, equity and access for all students, identify achievement gaps, and be used to improve instructional delivery with student achievement presentations to the board and community mid-year and at the end of the year. Number two, the West Orange Board of Education will be an active participant in monitoring and providing input into the strategic planning process, which will include community input and participation. The board will allocate the necessary and appropriate resources for the completion of the 5-year strategic plan by June 2023. And the board is going to receive training by New Jersey School Boards Association in October on strategic planning. So the board will be trained. Number three, the West Orange Board of Education will provide support to the administration and its development of district resources to support students and staff with social, emotional, and mental health needs throughout the school year, with mid-year and end-of-year presentations to the board and community. Number four, the West Orange Board of Education will direct the administration to issue requests for proposals, or as they are referred to as RFPs, for all of the district's major vendors, including insurance, legal, financial, architectural, transportation, and et cetera. Number five, the West Orange Board of Education will seek ways to continue to improve communication between the board and the community by relying on the work and recommendations of the board's Public Relations Committee and consensus of the board in developing an action plan. And just homework for the board for our next meeting, please come with ideas for the action plan for PR. And number six, the West Orange Board of Education will strive to have effective, open, respectful, and professional communication among board members, between board members, and the administration, and exhibiting the highest level of boardsmanship at board meetings by regularly participating in New Jersey School Board Association trainings, meetings, and workshops. And finally, number seven, the West Orange Board of Education supports the administration in the submission of the preschool expansion grant application to the New Jersey Department of Education in an effort to provide our community with public preschool opportunities and access. We will be voting on these goals at the end of the meeting this evening. The update on the 2020-21 board goals, if I get additional input from my fellow board members, they will eventually be posted on the website. I'm going to move right into Dr. Cascone, and then if we have questions, they can be short and collective, board members, on district and board goals. Dr. Cascone.
Thank you, President Trigg-Scales. I'm going to, relative to the update on the goals from last year, on June 26th, I actually presented with Mr. Mendez at the public meeting. It was both a kind of a closing of the loop on the previous strategic action plan, and part of that presentation was also sort of foreshadow to speak to the status of the goals from last year. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to direct community members who are interested in reviewing that. It is posted on the website under board presentations from the June 26th public meeting. Relative to goals for next year, I'm just going to, they are on the agenda for approval tonight by the board. They should be available to the public as a public attachment. And so, as opposed to reading them verbatim, I'm just going to kind of speak to the buckets a little bit more sort of anecdotally. So we will be moving forward with the application for a preschool expansion grant. As kind of a initial phase of that, we really want to sort of reopen the process, if you will, to our community. Understand what people are looking for, understand what people's concerns are, what their aspirations are, and even, community members who might have valuable feedback to provide to help inform that process. But the end game is to apply for it and to have it successfully awarded at the end of the year. We will move forward now that we've completed our kind of tied a bow, so to speak, on the previous strategic action plan, which, unfortunately was, there was a lot that happened over the course of that 5-year strategic action plan. I mean, a lot of it was accomplished, but there was also a lot of transition, and not the least of which the pandemic which hit for the last 18 months of that plan. But I think we all, regardless of our stakeholder group, I think we all acknowledge that it's really what a great time, what an appropriate time for us to really kind of come back together and understand what's on our roadmap for the next 5 years, what's important to us, what do we need to accomplish. So, we will be evaluating, although I think we're leaning towards school boards to do that work with us, but begin and ideally complete that process by the end of the school year. In some of our conversations with, our special education advocacy groups and parent groups, feedback sort of emerged from those meetings, amongst other pieces of feedback, but really an interest in seeing how we could create a more inclusive environment for our special needs students. And yes, in the classroom, but more importantly for, extracurricular opportunities and outside of school life. So that's a goal that our special services department is really going to get behind. One, to initially gather perceptions from stakeholders as to the degree to which they feel that exists presently, to take stock of some of the good things and best practices that we're already doing here in this district, but also, go to the research and the literature and understand, what are some best practices in the profession in general, and implement them, replicate what we're doing already, and then circle back to parents and understand if we've moved the needle in terms of that perception. We are going to continue with our district equity work and our equity audit. We had started that process last year. The survey that we put out, we did not quite get the response on it that we would have liked. And I think we just want to give it a little bit more deliberate attention, really message on it more overtly, really get people behind doing that survey. Our largest number of students, or the largest number of people who filled the survey out were actually our students. But look, that's darn important. I mean, we're glad you did. But we also, we want our families. Certainly want more of our families to be represented within that sample. So we will move forward with that, ultimately with the creation of an equity scorecard, which will also be informed by data that we're providing for the organization with which we're working: student achievement, suspension, attendance, staff demographics, and then of course the results from the survey as well will come together to form an equity scorecard, which then we will present out to the community, and that will really part and parcel help inform our strategic action plan as well, and our plan moving forward. We will work with our teachers to be implementing an SEL activity. Our lesson plan template does include now an SEL activity in all lessons, but we also understand that a corresponding professional development goal for staff, and one of our district-wide staff development goals or professional development goals is to really help teachers to gain an understanding of, like, what is SEL, right? And what does SEL look like in practice in the classroom, and equip them with those strategies and those lessons. And then last but not least is, we have a goal centered on student learning. And that is going to be, by June 2022, students in grade K through 5, I'll read this one verbatim. ELA K through 5, to accelerate student learning, all students will have access to standards-based instruction at grade level that addresses gaps in prior learning within the context of grade appropriate tasks focused on priority content as measured by growth in the following areas. We'll be using Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessments in grades ELA K through 5. We'll be using the MAP in ELA 6 through 10. Math K through 5 will be using the MAP. Math 6 through 8 iReady, and then math 9 through 12, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, end of unit assessments. And then, of course, there are quantitative benchmarks that are associated with each one of those assessment areas, which are reflected in the goal. So we obviously knew that, and by the way, final point, Mr. Scales, I'll just mention that, these goals were informed substantially by the feedback that we had solicited through the survey,
Right.
Which the board had administered to help inform their town hall on goal setting. You will notice that there's a lot of overlap between what we prioritized in our district goals and the feedback that we received from our staff and from our community relative to what they thought were priorities, which, by the way, were very well aligned. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Cascon.
You're welcome.
Do we have burning questions? Any burning questions, Ms. Huerta? Burning questions?
No, just a comment, just a burning comment. Just the fact that a lot of these goals revolve heavily around PR. I think that outreach has to be there, that communication piece has to be there. And I think that that's not an easy task to, take on just ourselves. And this is something that our student liaisons are going to be major in. Our community members are going to be essential in these goals and achieving these wonderful things that I hope will bring much success to our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Ms. Merklinger, burning question? Thank you. Burning, Mr. Rothstein?
Lukewarm at best. I'll
Lukewarm.
pass. Yeah.
No. Okay. Bahram, burning questions.
Scorching hot, scorching hot.
Scorching hot, okay.
So,
Love you guys already.
So in previous years, we've obviously done the MAP testing, NJSEE, SEA. I'm not even sure what the name is. We've gone through like 50 different names already. But in previous years, what I've noticed in my personal experience and in the experience of my cohorts is whenever we took these tests and we took them over and over again, like we'd still get the same results. And there would be like no change. It's like the way the curriculum and the content was actually taught. Like it would just be a repeat and repeat and repeat. There would be like no actual change in the way we were learning or what we were learning or anything about the content in general. Oh, my bad. Like there was like a very little that we learned. There was very little change after taking all these tests, after like being stuck hours on end, like literally taking these tests. I would take on like sometimes 2 to 3 hours, but we just kept seeing the same process. We take a test, we see no change, we get the same results. Is there going to be any change in that? Has there been any like progressive steps towards possibly addressing that?
That's like I could write a doctoral dissertation on that. I mean, that's big. So I mean, I think the easy answer to that is, we're required to administer these assessments. We absolutely should be utilizing the data from those to inform curricular practice, instructional practice. I can tell you that those processes do occur. And the extent to which they're actually impacting curriculum, what I would suggest is, unless you've taken the same course 2 years in a row, it would be difficult for you to know whether or not the instructional curricular practice had been adjusted based upon what we saw in the results, right? So I do think that there is analysis of that data. And of course, we know that there was no state testing last year, because of the pandemic. But I will tell you that I do believe, and will say publicly, that we can always get better at that, at really having the analysis of data, the way in which it informs our professional practice. We can always get better at that.
Thank you. Another burning question?
Yeah, actually clarifying question. So we will be taking map testing this year?
No, in fact, we have, the state has something new and exciting for you planned, which is the Start Strong assessment.
Right.
But fortunately, it shouldn't be. And listen, if you have any lamentations about that, you can direct them to the Department of Education. But we actually just sent I believe the communication just went out to parents today about that with the schedule. And that's really, it's different from the previous state assessments in that it's not meant to be a comprehensive assessment of knowledge. It's really just to kind of get a slice of a cross section of knowledge. So it won't be quite as cumbersome as other state tests have been in the past.
Thank you.
Yeah, it'll be different though.
Yes.
So you haven't taken this test before, so I mean, it will be different.
To be fair, we have heard that multiple times.
Start strong.
No, we've heard, oh, it's new. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be great.
This one really is.
Well, you know what? That is a cross we bear together as both students and administrators. So I feel you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All righty. Take a deep breath. Okay, so we are through superintendent and board reports, rather lengthy, and thank you for hanging in there with us. We are moving on to item number 9A is the first reading of the following board policy, 1648.13, school employee vaccination requirements, which is attachment 2. And this is a first reading. Any discussion on this first reading? Any, you want to add something, policy committee people?
I actually just had one question. So one section of this policy speaks to ensuring that contractors and providers who work on campus have followed a certain protocol in terms of COVID safety. And so I just wanted to know whether we have or whether we're working on procedures for checking anyone who comes onto school campuses.
Thank you for that, Mr. Rothstein. So I think it's important to understand sort of the timeline within which this is all played out. I think that the board can expect that this policy will definitely look different when you get the second reading, because this is a boilerplate policy from Strauss-Esme. It was imperative that we got it on as a first reading, and I think the meat and potatoes are there. So I would suggest that the board, in my humble opinion, should feel comfortable approving this as a first reading. But there's no question that as we thresh out, our district-based procedures particularly for testing, as well as statement of assurance from contractors, that kind of language will be more tailored for our district and will appear in a second reading, which I would aspire to get to you prior to the actual night of the board meeting so you could review it. Now, if you wanted some more specific information about the contractors, our intention is we've spoken with food services, spoken with Director of Buildings and Grounds, and essentially what we are going to be doing is putting together a legal document for any of our contractors. That's essentially a legally binding statement of assurance, which indicates that their companies have policies that are aligned with the executive order. We will not be requesting vaccination records from electricians that come here. Rather, we will be asking the contractor to legally verify and vouch for the fact that they're in alignment with the governor's order.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so is there a motion to accept this first reading of 1648?
All motion.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Merklinger. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Any further discussion? There being none, Mrs. Flowers, would you do the honors, please?
Okay, thank you, President Trigg-Scales. Ms. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
President Trigg-Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flowers. And moving on to B, second reading adoption of the following bylaws, board policies. I believe we have a motion to table 2 items. Policy person, Mr. Rothstein, would you
Yes.
like to make that motion?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to make a motion to table policy number 2270, religion in schools, and policy number 5511, dress and grooming.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Who was quick on the draw? Mrs. Whit. Okay. Any discussion? There being none, Mrs. Flowers, please.
Okay, Mrs. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
President Trigg-Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, now I would like to entertain a motion to adopt attachment 3, which is the second reading, adoption of the following bylaws, board policies minus number 2270 and 5511. Is there a motion?
All motion.
Thank you, Ms. Marklinger. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Any discussion here? There being none, Mrs. Flowers, please.
Mrs. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
Vice President President Trigg-Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have arrived, albeit a little later than usual, to our questions from the public on agenda items only. We ask that you approach the podium. You may remove your mask. You have 3 minutes. We ask that you give us your name and address. Agenda items only. Sorry. Oh. Oh, okay. Hi there.
Hi. Sorry, I'm also a little shorter as well.
Oh, no problem.
Probably just a mass of hair up here, I know. My name is Una Callender. I am a senior here at West Orange High School, and you asked for my address, correct?
Yes.
20 Belgrade Terrace.
Okay, thank you.
So, as I said, I'm a senior here, and while I know it isn't of the highest position of the student body, I do hold a position of leadership in my advanced theater class that I am very proud of. Now, with all due respect, right now, what I don't think we need is an apology for at one point feeling undervalued, because there is plenty of evidence that we actually have been undervalued as an arts community, which has been going on for years. Now, I can't go over all of it because I only have 3 minutes, so I'm going to bring us to how the late bus issue has opened a can of worms that have a lot of the art community in our school feeling like they aren't as important as the West Orange High School sports teams. Sports were given all of the school's late buses first, and theater students were not allowed to use these buses as well, basically from what I've heard as of today. Arts programs and sports programs have happened at roughly the same time, so I feel it would be important to mention that in the first few days of school, buses were only offered to athletes, while there were other programs going on, and all of the students who did not play sports were expected to go home or not participate. Like Rhoda previously mentioned, thank you very much, I appreciated that. It was previously mentioned how you were working towards middle school sports having late transportation as well. There's no mention of their musicals or any arts programs that I'm sure students in the middle schools have expressed interest in, as well as the sports students. Ignoring arts programs and only focusing on sports in middle schools is putting them in the exact same position high schoolers are in right now. It should be noted that on the half day, athletes were provided with a free lunch and late transportation home, while theater teachers and the play's director and producer were unaware that this was even an option. Fall play auditions were moved to another day, and theater students had to readjust their entire schedules because we were not given the same privilege as athletes to a late bus or to any free lunches because we were sent home early. Excuse me. This is not a little issue. As of the day we were not provided buses, the theater department is a week behind in the Laramie project, which we were supposed to have callbacks for today, but got pushed back because we didn't have enough time. So what I want to know is how you assume to fix the assumption that sports are prioritized over the arts, and how do you plan to show the art students that they matter just as much as sports and allow them equal opportunities as the sports teams, including transportation and any extra privileges they may receive on days they need anything provided for them. Because as we all saw on that one half day, the sports students were given everything they needed, and everyone else was sent home and either had to find a ride or there was nothing for them to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And our custom here is that we get all of the questions and then we respond at the end.
Michaela Bennett, Old Indian Road. Just a few brief comments, and I really didn't come prepared, but I want to thank you, Ms. Huerta, for bringing the equity issues front of mind for all of us. Rather than an afterthought, I think it's very important to recognize how the historically and traditionally underserved can be best served, particularly in these difficult times on issues like food and busing, and just making sure that they have what they need. You know, I personally believe the goalpost should be beyond diversity, inclusion, to being a place where we welcome, where everyone matters and where they belong. So thank you for raising that. I wanted to acknowledge and thank the student liaisons for their service, willingness to serve our district. I remember when Ms. Mordecai worked really hard to make sure that students had a seat at the table. I know that some of you have left, but I'm glad that you actually stayed because I did want to thank you. You are essential stakeholders and you bring a perspective to very important issues that wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So thank you for your willingness to serve and for the professionalism that you bring to the work. You set a fantastic example for your fellow students and also the adults in the room. And then 3 friendly problem-solving suggestions with the time I have left. Volunteers for rides. If there's no buses, maybe we can organize kind of a message board or something where organizing willing adults can offer rides to students. Volunteer testing so that you can start mitigating with COVID. Parents who are willing to provide you, testing is free. So you can just put a call out for any parents who would volunteer to have their students tested so that you know what's happening. Any teachers who would volunteer to be tested and report the results so you can kind of have eyes on. Just in a volunteer way. It would just really require maybe an app or something to load up the results. And then with the limited time I have left, food trucks. Why don't you invite food truck vendors over to Katz and Degnan? I kind of cringed at the idea of seniors off campus because to me, there's like a liability to that. But what about inviting food vendors to Katz, to Degnan? And, Benji's is a good example. There's an empanada lady. I know there's a pizza truck that's often in places. And I wonder how that might really enhance the experience and then, have food available for the students. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. Sorry, Robin Iserlis, 22 Yale Terrace. I wanted to welcome the new student liaisons, Baran, Rhoda, Adrian, and Hijab. I look forward to hearing from you. You were so impressive tonight, and thank you to Ms. Connors for all the work that you do mentoring the students. Buses, on Friday, bus number 143 never showed, at least to our stop, if that's helpful. No call either. Hopefully that was just a moment. Second, the late buses. It seems to me that there needs to be better coordination among all the student clubs, athletics, and the transportation department. My son does rely on the late buses, and he has said that no one seems to know what time they are leaving. This includes coaches, bus drivers, and security, or where they're going. So maybe just some coordinated efforts. I do want to just thank Una for speaking out. I've had two students in the district, and they were both in athletics, but I have long felt that the arts, the creative arts in this district has gotten second shift in about everything. Just even how announcements are made here, it's the West Orange Athletics and other activities on the agenda. So I do hope this is a new day for a new move forward. And thank you to Una for bringing that to our attention. Lastly, though I tried to maintain a positive tone, I found it absolutely disgraceful that it took Ms. Merklinger well over an hour to put your mask on. One of the roles as Board of Ed members is to be good citizens and guardians of the district. Right now, the district policy is to be masked indoors. This is something that is true of our district and our state. I hope you take this responsibility more seriously moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the public?
With this, I'm a little taller, sorry. Good evening, Brian Rock, 63 Rock Spring Avenue, and welcome as well to the new student liaisons. So I wanted to focus on the district goals that were on the agenda and highlight two of them, and I had one question. So number one, I want to highlight the focus on pre-K. I think that is a great investment that we can make in our schools, given the governor's announcement recently to ramp up universal pre-K throughout the state in the next 10 years. This is a timely moment for us to make sure that we can take advantage of that and invest in pre-K here in West Orange. Also want to highlight number three, because I think that's an excellent idea to make sure that all of our programs, not just our classroom and curricular programs, but extracurriculars, whether it's sports or arts, are open to our special education students. Those programs are so important in your high school education, and to make sure that those students are not forgotten and neglected is important to have an inclusive school system. The other question, though, was about what seemed to be missing there, which was any talk about HVAC facilities or maintenance. Right, just last week, we had to have an early dismissal because of heat, which tells me that we have work to do on HVAC, right? Over the summer, I know it was mentioned, and for all the talk of dampers, right, we still have a lot of investments to make in the air conditioning and HVAC infrastructure in the schools. There was a mention at one point of the possibility of a referendum that could put out to bond the cost of that, because that's really the only effective way to deal with this. We can't deal in an operating budget with fixing very expensive HVAC systems. So I wanted to know, A, if we have any kind of plan or timeline to do that, or just a general sense of what list of items would need to be on that referendum for it to be put forward at some point in the near future.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bilal Abdullah, 2 Westman Drive. Thank you, everybody, for your service. I'd like to thank our young people. Thank you for asking those questions. Thank you for involving yourself. And at the end of the day, we hear you, and it's all about you. Always remember that. It's always about you. Water. My daughter goes to the Kelly Elementary School, and there is no water. So we're talking about COVID. We're talking about immune systems. We're talking about health. There's no water at the Kelly School, and I don't understand this piece. So I think the water fountains are down. I know a lot of schools or airports, I don't know if they have it in the high school where they have the new water machines where you just stick the bottle under there. Why don't we have that at the elementary schools? We should not be in a situation where we don't have water when we're talking about viruses that attack the immune system. So they're bringing the water bottles to school now, but there's no, bottles of water, which you can get for $1. There's no coolers next to the classes or in the classes. So I just want to bring that to you guys' attention that is a water issue and we need water in the schools. And down the road, I know financially removing the old water fountains is probably something you guys might want to add in your budget down the road, but I think we need to go ahead. The technology is there where we can move away from the old prehistoric water fountains and get the ones where, you just stick the bottles under and it's purified. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions here on the floor? How many call-in questions do we have, Mrs. Flowers, on agenda items? I don't mean to put you on the spot. A lot?
A handful, but all of them have been asked and answered
Okay,
based on the dialogue that we've had already.
great. Okay. All right. So we will begin to address.
Skills. I would say that there are a few that are kind of peppered in there that I didn't really address directly.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
we'll
I-
save those till the
and-
end.
Yeah, and I just want to make
Okay.
sure that I honor those questions that people raised.
Okay.
Many of them were answered, but there are a few little singular ones I'd like to address.
Absolutely. Okay. Dr. Cascone, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, President Scales. This calendar. I think that there's sort of like a micro response and then a more macro one. I mean, I think the micro one is a little bit easier, as it relates to this most recent situation. And I can say that, and obviously, I just, while I understand, with your belief that this is a more global, systemic, ongoing issue, I can understand how you would consider just that apology is somewhat insufficient. I will tell you that in that particular instance, I can tell you that it was absolutely, certainly never my intention for there ever to be any exclusionary piece there. And I am sorry that it was played out in that manner. I can tell you that there was outreach to me on the part of the athletics department to understand what the implication of the early dismissal would be on athletics, how we would approach feeding student athletes. And so a plan was presented to me and I thought that was appropriate. In terms of getting the message to any other clubs and activities that were also in play on that day, and giving them the information that they could stay if they needed to, it absolutely should have happened, right? So I can acknowledge that. In terms of understanding the way in which members of the arts community feel that there has not been equity, and perhaps ways in which that can be improved, I do think that needs to be part of an ongoing dialogue. I think that the building level is an appropriate place to do that, but as a show of good faith, if you'd like to, put together a group of students that come from that constituency, I'm happy to start with just a focus group, just an opportunity for you folks to get together with me and just tell me about your experience, tell me examples so that I can be a more informed, partner in that process moving forward. but that will need to be, it's like any other kind of culture change, right? And sometimes we don't even realize it. It's kind of that implicit bias, right? We don't even realize, the exclusionary nature of our words until people share that with us, right? But I'm happy to start that process with you. And, I would say, if we can keep it to maybe, I would say a maximum of 10 students, and we can either meet in person or virtually, and I would very much look forward to doing that. So you can find my email, get in touch with me. Okay. I love the food truck idea, by the way. That's a good one. And that's going, and that's definitely going on the list. Meeting with the high school team tomorrow. I think it's a really, really good idea. And I like the volunteer testing. As a matter of fact, President Trick Scales mentioned that to me, and that's something that we could get up and running pretty quickly. And I think it's a good show of good faith. It's a good intermediate option until we're able to get something more extensive in place. So thank you for that, Ms. Ben. I appreciate both of those suggestions, as well as the volunteer rides and message boards. So 3 wonderful suggestions. Again, the late buses are going to be on on the principal's agenda, to understand that, and the Chromebooks are two matters that we need to continue to drill down on, and try and address that equity piece. Mr. Rock, I appreciate the question about the referendum. Coincidentally, I just had a meeting today with our architects and director of buildings and grounds. So those processes are ongoing. In fact, we're about to open up. Is it next week that pre-bid opening for the second RFP? Yeah. What's that called again? It's called a pre-bid opening?
It's the pre-bid meeting.
Pre-bid meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. So, we are going to commence a second round of mechanical ventilation installation. All of these projects were part of the, it was a $54 million referendum, but only about 35 million of that was actually HVAC. So we are knocking off some of that. I think that a referendum is in our future. I would say the earliest that we could potentially do it would be March, but I don't think we have enough runway there to get that done. The next date after that would be September. And my thought on it is that we go for the whole Megillah, that we don't piecemeal it. Because, one thing that this has raised is really, I think people are like, we need to find a way to get tempered air into our buildings. Like we can't exist in these buildings anymore in the heat there are. So while the initial referendum didn't necessarily involve air conditioning all our spaces, I think that that's something that we need to really look at. But it would be around approximately $30 million. That would potentially include some other projects that are critical. But those deliberations and conversations continue, though they don't necessarily appear as a district goal per se. And thank you for the question about the water bottles. So we, as a short-term solution, we have worked with our food services provider, and they are going to be sending down a number of cases of water. I don't think it's in them weekly or monthly or cases of water. Yeah, I mean, we have some of those filtered water fountains in the district. And, until the pandemic, the water fountains that we had were adequate, right? It's only with the fact that it's no longer sanitary for, students. One could argue it never really was, but certainly, nowadays, it's okay. Nowadays, it's you can't argue it, right? So, but all kidding aside, we have addressed that to some extent by putting some stock and water into the buildings, and we'll continue to do that. Certainly, we ask, if parents are able to send their kids in with a sizable vessel of water, that would be appreciated. but we are plugging in some additional resources in the schools. And I would agree, long-term, it's something we should consider. And Ms. Flowers, if you might make note of it, for our long-range facilities plan, if we don't have that in the plan, it probably should be that we retrofit all of our water fountains with that capacity. I
just want to back up for a
Hmm.
second. I missed the gentleman's name from Kelly. Do you have his name?
Water at Kelly School. I did
Oh,
not record.
may we have your name again, sir? Abdur, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to kind of tease some of these specific questions out. There was a question here about the policy of not allowing kids older than first grade to have snack. Yeah, that comes from Miss Moses. I did revisit that conversation with the elementary building principals at our last meeting. And at the moment in grades 2 through 5, their perspective was definitively in grades 3 through 5. They did not observe that kids were experiencing any issues with not having snack. The only kind of tweener grade is that second grade. But presently, we really want to try and get into a rhythm with our instruction. It is something we may revisit, but presently we're going to keep snack just to K1. And really the issue is that, it's the time required to move students out of the classroom. And of course, when the weather is good, it's easy. We move them outside, but in the winter months, that becomes an even greater challenge. And the instructional time required to take students out to bring them back in. Presently, the consensus amongst elementary principals was that we were going to hold with that practice, at least for the time being. There's a question here from Ms. Bookbinder regarding, is West Orange considering a model that would allow students potentially exposed to COVID at school to test daily rather than quarantine? And is West Orange applying for state funding for testing for this purpose? Well, we are applying to participate in the state's program, though I don't believe that is a component of their program. But I made note of this just to bring it up with my the Health and Safety Committee. My understanding of the DOH guidelines is that, and I'm assuming that daily testing would be some sort of a home rapid test. Imagine that, because if it were a PCR, I can imagine doing a PCR on a daily basis, and then there's a lag in time between the results. So I'm assuming we're referring to an at-home rapid, and the DOH does not endorse that testing for cases of close contact or exposure. They only advocate for home rapid testing in the case of asymptomatic testing, which would be, for example, on a travel quarantine. You could potentially be asymptomatic and use a home test to demonstrate negativity to come back, but not for close contact. Just bear with me one moment. I think that those were addressed. Yes, I think those were the only two that weren't addressed in my other answers and commentary.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cascone. Any pressing board comments? No? Okay, the food truck idea is fabulous. I've seen it work at other high schools, and there's a procedure so that they are permitted by the town to be there. And so you just don't have an influx of food trucks from all over. So I was feeling that same wavelength there about the food trucks. A great idea. Or either opening a restaurant in the neighborhood, little fundraising activity. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 11, reports, discussions, and recommendations. And I am looking at personnel, items 1 through 5, attachments 4 and 5. And curriculum attachment 6. And I do see that we have a retirement, Miss Amy Miller from Gregory, a paraprofessional with 15 years in the district. And so congratulations to Miss Miller and welcome to the Every Day is Saturday Club. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve.
I'll motion.
Thank you, Ms. Merklinger. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Any discussion on any of these items? There being none, Mrs. Flowers, would you please?
Ms. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
President Trigg-Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
And moving on to C, finance items A and B, attachments 7 through 11. And I do see that we have a donation from the Blackboard Giving Fund from New York Life and its donors to the high school, $60. So thank you very much to the Blackboard Giving Fund. Is there a motion to approve finance items A and B? That would be special services and business, attachment 7 through 11.
I'm sorry, can I just ask a question first? On the last approval, did we do item B, curriculum and instruction? I just might not have heard. It wasn't
Yes.
included. Okay. All good.
Is there a motion?
I'll motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, Mrs. Flowers, thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
President Trigg-Scales.
Yes,
Thank you.
and that moves us to miscellaneous. And items 1 and 2, attachments 12 and 13, and that would be the board goals and the district goals for 2021-22. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yes, I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Mrs. Flowers, please.
Mrs. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
President Trigg-Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
And now we are up to item 12, petitions and hearings of citizens. These petitions and hearings may be on non-agenda items. We ask that you approach the podium. You may remove your mask and please give us your name and address. And you have 3 minutes. Okay, we don't have any here in public, in present, I should say. Do we have questions, Ms. Flowers, on non-agenda items?
We did receive a handful through the Google Doc, but I believe these were also asked and answered. Dr. C, did you see any that I may have missed?
No. I would just, if I may, President Trigg-Scales,
Certainly.
very quickly, there were some folks who, staff and families who just provided feedback and questions regarding the late buses and the arts. And I would just reiterate to them, the same thing I did to the, young lady who came here tonight was I appreciate the feedback. I think you know me well enough after a couple of years being here that, it's not going to fall on deaf ears. And I believe in, the environment and the culture being welcoming and supportive and validating of all. So, I appreciate it. This particular case was an unfortunate oversight, but I also understand that we need to do some listening and understand ways in which folks see this as more of kind of a historical piece and how we can improve that moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cascone. Board members, any other? Well, it's now your turn. Okay, so we're actually up to report from the board president and or board members. And we will start with Mrs. Huerta.
Thank you, President Trigg-Scales. Just NJ School Board Association update that we will be having an Essex County School Board meeting tomorrow. So that's all the members of Essex County. I'm excited because this will be my first one in person. I've attended them virtually. It is a hybrid, so you can choose to be at the actual meeting space or you can do virtual. So I hope my colleagues make time to be able to participate in that. I'll send you the information. But just a couple of comments for the public. Miss Michaela Bennett did mention the food trucks. I thought that was a great idea. Another thing in regards to the way some of the students and some of the community members feel about how sports are announced versus how arts and other programs are announced. I think this would be a great way to throw in that PR and kind of create a cohesive calendar of all sports and other extracurricular activities. Also, I think this would be beneficial to the community, not just the school-based community, but our businesses. I actually worked at Burger King while I was in high school. And as I got older, I actually managed that location. It's one of our really high producing stores, very busy. We hated football night. It was chaos. But those are the heads up that even those, the stories with the student liaison saying that the bagel box line is at the fence. Those are things that our local businesses would like a heads up, and they could probably even, prepare in the morning, open up earlier. It creates more business for them. It makes it more orderly. Those are all things I think that benefit not just our community, our school community, but our businesses and our, one thing, we don't want our businesses to be resentful of our children, our students, they don't, kids are loud, they're excited, and sometimes they come in and they're hungry. So, I think those are important takeaways from this meeting tonight. So thank you. And that's all. Oh, I'm sorry. Hispanic Heritage Month is this month from September 15th until October 15th. There are a couple of events lined up in town. October 1st there will be flag raising. There's a couple of other events that I believe Ms. Terry will be announcing in her report. So I'll leave that to her. That's all. Thank you. And have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Miss Melinda. Okay, Ms. Merklinger.
Thank you. So just to kind of piggyback off of what Ms. Wertz was saying, we do have a calendar on our Board of Ed page, and the high school has a calendar as well. So a lot of the events can be found there, especially whether it's arts or sports or athletics, whatever. Those events are posted there. So just encourage our community to check out all of our social media. I know Perry and Cynthia do a great job of getting a lot of the information out there, regardless of whether it's arts, athletics, PTA events, everything that's going on. Definitely encourage folks to check those out. I know we have some back to school nights coming up. So check online for those. Definitely encourage folks to get involved with their PTAs as the school year's school year starting to get underway, and help planning with events. I know those individual school communities could definitely use folks to volunteer. That's one of the biggest things that we run into, just as a coach myself, is getting parent volunteers and getting folks to, it's kind of a lost art of volunteering for free. So definitely encourage folks to join in where you can and if you have the time. I did want to just note that October 15th is homecoming for West Orange High School. So for folks to mark their calendars for that. And this Friday is PAL Appreciation Night at the football game. The marching band and a lot of the teams will be up there. The pep rally is this Thursday, so definitely encourage folks. It's open to the whole community, so definitely encourage everyone to come out. You can see the marching band, all of our athletic teams, different organizations within the West Orange High School will be performing, so it should be a fun night. And that's 6:30 on Thursday. And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Merklinger. Mr. Rothstein.
All right. A quick word on policies and policy adoption. So by my count, we're down to 27 policies that need to be approved. So that's great. Out of the 400 million that needed to be approved, to be down to 27 is pretty good. The hard part is that each of those 27 requires some amount of revision, and some of these are complex. They take a little time, and I know that we're well behind schedule on it, but the light is absolutely at the end of the tunnel. And so I know Mrs. Merklinger and I will continue to work on these and get them before the board as quickly as possible. So of the ones of the 27 that still require work, a small number of those still remain with the administration for input. Most of those sit with the Board of Ed for revision and proposal to the board for acceptance. I've been working on those and I'm about 50% of the way through, and we'll work as a policy committee to make sure we're in alignment on that before we push those forward. Once those are distributed, that will be, we really need to make that happen in the next week. Before next Monday. Then we'll just seek board feedback. Hopefully we'll be all good to get that out to Strauss Esme for revisions, and then the final step will be approval. And as Terry said earlier, getting everything accessible to the public through Elon Online, which will be great. It'll be huge celebration. And then the last thing I wanted to say was just a quick reflection on the Stop for Nikhil event at the high school here on Sunday. I just wanted to give a thank you to the Badlani family for your dedication to safety and to the arts in memory of Nikhil. Yours is a incredibly generous and loving act that really leads all of us in the community by example and has brought us together as a community year after year. And so thank you for all of the efforts that you put forward to make such a difference here and really throughout the country.
Thank you, Mr. Rothstein. I'm not going to repeat any of the wonderful things my fellow board members have said. But I want to talk about the Love and Unity concert that's coming up this Saturday from 12 until 6 at the Edison Central 6 Field. And I want to reiterate that in addition to all of the wonderful musical programming that's in place, is that art is also going to be featured. And so I want to make sure that the community is aware of that. The West Orange art teachers, in collaboration with our own local artist, Gina Velasquez, are working on this fantastic mural. And it's an interactive mural. So anyone who attends the Love and Unity Fest can put their stamp on it. You can actually be a part of this mural. And then we have to find somewhere to put the mural. So Dr. Cascone will be looking at you for where the mural can go, but also talking to the township, because this is certainly a community unity event. I'm going to take the liberty of doing something a little bit different that I haven't done in 2 years. When I first got on the board, I took the liberty of reading 13 things school board members wish people knew about them. And so I'm just going to highlight some of those just as a reminder. I figure I do it in my first year and my third year. All right. So number one, we are the best trained elected officials in the state. We are the only officials who have to take training courses and cover topics such as policy and school finance and student achievement. Number two, we have to go through a criminal background check before taking office. And again, this is a mandate, and no other elected official has to go through such a criminal background check. Number three, we have to adhere to a code of ethics. The code of ethics for school board members says, among other things, that board members will not administer schools, but see that they are well run. Number four, we are legally required to go into executive session when we discuss certain matters. And you'll see on our agendas that we now highlight those areas that we are discussing. And this occurs, generally it's an hour before we come into public. And if required, we will meet after the public meeting. And number five, we can't tell you the real reason that the teacher was non-renewed or that the student, or why the student got suspended. Part of our code of ethics is that we vow to honor confidentiality. So we can't talk about personnel and we can't talk about students. Number six, we're not the person to talk to if you have a problem with your child's teacher. We have something called the chain of command. If you have a problem with your child's teacher, we would ask that you try to resolve it with the teacher. If not, then the supervisor for that teacher. So in the elementary schools, it would be the principal. As you move up to middle school and high school, it could be a department chair, assistant principal, up to the principal. We are the last stop on that chain, the very last stop. Lots of people jump right to us, and then it has to go all the way back down to where it originated. Number seven, at school board meetings, the public comment period is for the members of the public to comment, not engage in a discussion with board members. So we take your comments and your questions and we address them when appropriate. Number eight, we don't get keys to the school buildings. We have to sign in just like everybody else and ring the doorbell. Number nine, and this one, we really want you to know, we do not get paid a salary. So when you threaten to withhold our pay, nothing from nothing leaves nothing. So we are not paid employees. We are volunteers. We get paid in other ways, and it's not through currency. Number 10, we only oversee one employee, and that is the superintendent, Dr. Cascone. There's a whole line. Dr. Cascone is the superintendent, and he is responsible for the supervision and evaluation of all those under him. But we are his direct report, or he is our direct report. And so we only supervise and evaluate one employee. One or two board members cannot enact new policies. So two people might come up with a really good idea, but it takes three. It takes a quorum. You have to have at least 3 of the 5 to push forward a new policy. And you have to know we don't decide when school is closed for a snow day or early dismissal day. That's all Dr. Cascone.
Can I give you that job, or would you be willing?
You'd like us to pass that on to us, right? But number 13 says, we take great pride in the most satisfying part of our job. And that's having a lasting impact on the education of the children in our community and helping every child reach his or her full potential. That's how we get paid. And so we like to have happy parents, and happy parents come about because we have happy students. And so those are the 13 things we wish everybody knew about board members. All right, and so our next board meeting will be held at 7:30 p.m. on October 4th here at West Orange High School. And I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
I motion.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Merklinger. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is officially adjourned.